Hello, everyone, and thanks for joining me in this talk on the history of Southampton Hospital. In these difficult times, when the medical staff at Stony Brook Southampton Hospital is working heroically every day, fighting the deadly coronavirus and saving lives, it's interesting to look back at the hospital's history and to find that it was an extraordinary act of medical heroism that led to its founding. The year is 1908, and as the story goes, Dr. George Skank and Dr. Joseph Wheelwright are called to the home of a desperately ill woman. They find that their patient is in need of immediate surgery, and with the nearest medical facility no closer than Greenport, they have no choice but to perform surgery without delay. They do so on a kitchen table by the light of a smoky kerosene lamp in conditions so shocking to the participants and ultimately to the community that the call goes out for an emergency hospital. How odd it seems that Southampton should have lacked the most rudimentary facility for handling medical emergencies at a time when the village's stature as a fashionable resort is on the rise and its people are enjoying a building boom and a cultural flowering of unprecedented proportions. Yet the lag is typical of the times. Prior to the 20th century, most people were cared for at home, even when surgery was required. In fact, medical treatment in Southampton in 1908 is arguably superior to that available in most locations outside of big cities. It's a time when diploma mills are churning out quack doctors, and Southampton is fortunate in that medicine is considered a high calling among the village's well-placed families. In addition, New York doctors from the resort community have traditionally taken active roles in their adopted village. Ever since the arrival in 1877 of this very handsome man, Dr. T. Guyot Thomas, one of the most celebrated gynecologists of his age, and the man often credited as being founder of the Southampton Summer Colony. Dr. Skank is a local doctor. Dr. Wheelwright is a New York City surgeon. Though seeming to come from two different worlds, both doctors are held in high affectionate esteem in Southampton. Their partnership and the role of another prominent city physician, Dr. Albert Ely, who you see there on the right, are testimony to the complex and deep-rooted partnership between the local and summer communities. Formed around the need for a medical facility, it has been strengthened over the years as a combined but seldom melding force in the support of the hospital. In August 1908, Dr. Albert Ely, spurred by the impromptu surgery of his colleagues, writes an open letter to the Southampton Press. In it, he calls for a hospital dispensary for the proper care of the indigent sick and urges that the emergency hospital be supervised by a resident nurse. Dr. Ely's appeal is quickly acted upon, and by the winter of 1908-09, nurse Charlotte Lillywhite is installed in 2 rooms in Stephen Goodale's boarding house on Hampton Road. Nurse Lillywhite is paid $65 a month and expected to make house calls as well. The indigent are indeed served, but middle and some upper class people are also among Miss Lillywhite's patients, reflecting changing attitudes towards hospital treatment in the country at large. Word spreads, and there are more and more patients. So many that cots have to be placed in the halls, and then 3 more rooms have to be added. Then comes the summer, and a crushing caseload for Miss Lily White. Recognizing that the dispensary is unable to meet the medical needs of the population in all seasons, community leaders form the Southampton Hospital Association, which they envision as the governing body of the future Southampton Hospital. The association holds its first meeting on July 1st, 1909, when a slate of officers, carefully calibrated to give cottagers and locals equal representation, is elected, and its mission defined with these well-chosen words, quote, "The object of the association is the establishment, support, and management of an institution for the purpose of affording medical and surgical aid and nursing to sick and disabled persons of every creed, nationality, and color," close quotes. Incorporation of the association is approved in November. Among the association's first act is the approval of the purchase of the former Topping House at the corner of Meeting House Lane and Lewis Street for a hospital, paying $6,000. Separate fundraising campaigns, one aimed at cottagers, one at locals, are initiated to pay for it and for an option on adjoining property. The dual solicitations acknowledge the social divide between local and summer communities, but assume, correctly, a willingness to combine forces for a common good, a pattern that will continue in the years ahead. After underestimating the community's medical needs in the past, there is a new willingness to think big for the future. To no one's surprise, by the end of 1910, the hospital's second home has also become inadequate. Extra rooms must be rented in the neighborhood, and tents are pitched on the grounds. It's obvious to everyone that the current facility, which is capable of caring for only 5 patients at once in the winter and 10 in summer, will not do. Plans and fundraising for a large modern hospital have community support, and not for the first time, Southampton's beloved benefactor Samuel Longstreth Parish comes forward with a generous gift. From a family of Pennsylvania Quakers, Parish was practicing law in New York when he first came to Southampton in the 1880s and fell in love with the village. Like so many of his contemporaries in that first wave of cottagers, he saw the advantage of investing in real estate, where property values were rising swiftly along with the village's status as a fashionable resort, and Parish was able to bring other interested parties together to participate in the boom, buying up properties while also investing his heart in the village. He was responsible over the years for many village enhancements, including the art museum that bears his name. And on an autumn evening in 1911, he invites members of the hospital's board of governors and local leaders to meet in his home, the present-day Southampton History Museum, the Rogers Mansion. His purpose is to announce that he will donate about 2.5 acres on Old Town Road for a hospital if the village will agree to extend and maintain Herrick Road eastward from Little Plains Road. Whoops. The deal is gratefully accepted by the village, which adds a bonus. Lewis Street, too, will be extended to link with the Herrick Road extension, thus opening up the area for development. Acting quickly, still in 1911, the hospital awards the contract for the new building to E. Elmer Smith, the popular young builder who will later serve as village mayor. With no time to lose, Smith's crew breaks ground on the new hospital late that same year. Support for the hospital takes many forms. By 1911, $35,000 has been subscribed to the building fund, with separate donations toward nursing expenses. A costume ball is hosted by James Breeze and his wife at the Orchard, their Hill Street mansion, today the centerpiece of the Whitefield condominiums. It brings in more than $2,000 from society frolickers and becomes an annual event to benefit the hospital. A report in the local press notes that a women's auxiliary, organized by a few of Southampton's summer residents, has guaranteed the sum of $2,500 annually for 2 years for the payment of nurses. This galvanizes the formation of women's hospital auxiliaries in villages throughout Southampton town. Money and such items as layettes for indigent newborns are favored contributions by cottager women. Local auxiliaries tend to hold bake sales and take an active role in the kitchen to cook and can for the hospital larder. Heading a report of donations received by the Sag Harbor Auxiliary in October 1912 is a contribution from the well-known philanthropist, Mrs. Russell Sage. Her generosity will enable the hospital to purchase an ambulance, which will be urgently needed. On February 22nd, 1913, the ladies of the hospital auxiliaries are gracious hostesses at the grand opening of the new hospital. More than 1,500 people brave the weather to converge on the rain-soaked site to behold the new building and admire its handsome colonial design, provided gratis by architect and summer resident T. Marcoux Robertson. I believe his name is Robert Marcousson. Leaving trails of mud, they traipse through its impressive interior, its X-ray room, mortuary, kitchen, laboratory, and operating room on the ground floor. Upstairs, they admire the 2 large wards with views of the sea and the tasteful private rooms, and also 2 piazzas at either end of the building, included so that convalescents can enjoy some fresh air on pleasant days. During the early years of World War I, many people in Southampton share the attitude of other Americans who view the fighting as something going on over there. Dominating the local news are the anti-alcohol and women's suffrage campaigns, and in 1915, frenzied preparations for the 275th anniversary of Southampton's founding. Among other celebratory events, on Founders Day, June 12th, just about everyone in town is on hand to take part in an extravagant pageant depicting the town's historical highlights. Meanwhile, a growing population is about to render the new hospital inadequate, and plans are drawn for the first of many additions to come. Fundraising for a new wing on the east side of the building goes well, and in February 1916, construction begins on the addition that will double the hospital's capacity from about 20 beds to 50, thus relieving the crowded conditions. As the population continues to increase, there will be successive additions in 1929, 1935, 1965, 1975, until Robertson's colonial design is scarcely recognizable. Even as the work on the new wing progresses, there is growing anxiety as calls for entering World War I grow louder. A more immediate worry for the community and the hospital is the epidemic of infantile paralysis that is claiming an alarming number of victims in the New York area in the spring of 1916. To allay the concerns of anxious parents, Dr. Hugh Halsey and C. Elmer Smith, now serving as mayor, take front page space in the July 13th edition of the Southampton Press to assure residents of the vigilance of the Board of Health, but also to stress the importance of cleanliness, sterilization of milk and water, and thorough cooking of all foods. Rumors flourish in a climate of fear, especially after the Southampton Town Board purchases a house in North Sea for the hospital, and people assume it is intended for polio cases. When the epidemic subsides in the fall, there are 9 cases undergoing treatment, and the epidemic is seen to have been less severe in Southampton than anticipated. However, there has been 1 fatality, and in subsequent years, epidemics will recur. The pageant was perhaps the last great display of public expansiveness before the inevitability of sending American boys to fight in World War I becomes clear. At a time when patriotism runs high and recruiting for the military is considered God's work, Southampton men do their part. With doctors and nurses needed for the war effort, the hospital has to make do with its ranks depleted. Among others, Dr. David H. Halleck, later chief of surgery at the hospital, joins the medical corps and ships off for France. Then, in a cruel twist of history, as the World War winds down, the devastating Spanish flu pandemic is gearing up. The initial manifestations of the disease, which will ultimately claim more lives than the war itself, are relatively tame. However, the failure to institute isolation and quarantine measures in time, a failure that's been widely repeated in 2020, that allowed contagion to soar. By the time stringent measures are taken in Southampton, it is too late to prevent some 30 deaths, including that of Mayor C. Elmer Smith, who leaves a wife, 4 children, and a community in deep mourning. In time, Southampton, like the rest of the country, recovers from the terrible years of war and pestilence to thrive in the roaring 20s. It is not always a smooth path. In 1921, controversy erupts when some of the hospital's major contributors challenge the perpetuating power of the Board of Governors and demand representation on the board to assure that wider views will be considered. Colonel H.H. Rogers, the Standard Oil heir, whose 2 splendid estates are Black Point, which is shown above, and the port of missing men in North Sea, leads the charge and wins the day. The old board resigns, and a new slate of elected officers is installed with H.H. Rogers as its president. A new set of younger, livelier social leaders in the summer colony emerges in the 20s, with H.H. Rogers' beautiful daughter Millicent, seen up there on the left, among its leaders. To enliven the calendar of social events benefiting the hospital, they propose a street fair. It's an instant success, achieving a breathtaking level of extravagance with each new edition. Among the most imaginative eyes from the mind of the exuberant decorator Francis Hartman Marcoux is the transformation of the unfinished soldiers' monument at Lake Agawam into an extravagant fairy tale mosque, which you see there on the right. By 1923, however, the street fair has run its course. H. Rogers has decided that it is too risky to rely on good weather for the success of the hospital's major fundraiser. In 1924, the hospital embarks on a new venture, a training school for nurses. The concept had already been approved by H. Rogers and his board in 1922, and he has committed to provide the initial funding with a $30,000 donation. The formidable Ellen Jacobson on the left, strict but beloved, is put in charge and will have a 2-decade career at the hospital. When she moves over to the hospital itself in 1930, she's succeeded by Edna L. Parkin, the woman on the right. A handsome nurse's residence is completed in 1925. Students receive instruction in the basement of the residence, and in 6 months' time, they are taught the procedures necessary to deliver patient care and to assume enormous responsibilities at the hospital. Up until World War II, student nurses are expected to staff the entire hospital with supervision from a limited staff of doctors and registered nurses. There is a tunnel connecting the nurses' residence to the hospital. And if a woman goes into labor in the middle of the night, a student is often awakened to race through the tunnel and attend the birth. One of those students may have been on hand on July 28, 1929, when future First Lady Jacqueline Bouffier was born at the hospital at a cost to her parents that was likely little more than $50, judging from the bill received that same month by the parents of baby Berst. By 1930, Southampton, like most places in the industrial world, has plunged into depression. There are now 100 beds at the hospital, with 2 maintained by auxiliaries as free beds for the poor. Auxiliaries have been quick to increase their duties, focusing on services to the needy. Maternity cases are a particular concern, and with medical opinion stressing the need for mothers and newborns to spend 10 days to 2 weeks in the hospital, their pledge to keep a free bed at the disposal of a maternity case at any time is a challenge. Many pledges made to the hospital in flush times are not collectible, though not all Southampton's rich become poor, and some remain generous. The Southampton Press's Cottager column reports that from their yacht anchored at Mar-a-Lago, the Huttons have donated more than 3,000 boxes of food to the needy of Florida. In staunchly Republican Southampton, FDR's avalanche of New Deal legislation is greeted with sour acceptance. The source is hated, but the relief is needed. On September 21st, 1938, the most severe and terrifying hurricane to hit Long Island in living memory strikes without warning. The injured are rushed to the hospital, but in the immediate aftermath, the grimmest work is done by two doctors who treat the wounded and the dying in a makeshift field hospital in Southampton Beach, the village that has taken the worst hit. Laboring by the light of kerosene lamps and candles, echoing the experience of the two Southampton doctors in 1908, they work into the night. There are 23 fatalities in Southampton, 2 in Southampton Village. Losses in trees and buildings are staggering, and a field where salvaged items can be reclaimed is a depressing sight. That's in Southampton Beach. The 1938 hurricane is sometimes credited with giving the area a head start on the economic recovery, providing jobs for many in repairs and rebuilding. But the hospital continues to struggle, and Hitler's advances in Europe increase the gloom. And it's clear that the hospital will have to send many men, many doctors and nurses for the war effort because patriotic men and women are enlisting again. But isolation and sentiment is strong. In 1940, the Western world is in deep trouble and clearly headed for more. But Southampton is about to experience what has been called its greatest social moment. Ford Motor Company mogul Henry Ford II, a summer resident and hospital benefactor of unrivaled importance, is married to Anne MacDonald on June 13th. And the rich, the famous, and their retinues inundate the village, arriving at the Ford estate in their private rail cars, yachts, and limousines. The Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor on December 7, 1941, silences the voices of resistance, and once again, there is a rush to join the military, and the hospital struggles with its ranks once again depleted. Dr. Halleck, now too old to enlist, is among the few who remain on the medical staff. There are reports of socialites joining local women, enrolling in classes to learn the skills of hospital aides and do their part, and the auxiliaries fly into action, helping the needy who fill the wards while the well-heeled are in snug private rooms, often served by private duty nurses and waited on by their maids and white-gloved butlers. In the pre-nursing home era, a few wealthy people simply move into the hospital. Elizabeth Morton, whose philanthropic endeavors include the Morton Wildlife Center, is a longtime resident whose will promises to include a generous bequest to the hospital. When, after a change of regime, she is unceremoniously told to leave because the hospital will no longer serve as a hotel, she throws her will out the window in a rage. The order is quickly reversed. The 1950s are marked by a series of summer polio epidemics that once again strike horror and fear in parents. A special polio team at the hospital works relentlessly, administering the latest largely ineffective treatments. And it isn't until the Salk vaccine trials in 1954 that the disease meets its match. Administrators recognize that pre-war fundraising patterns are in urgent need of updating, and glamorous socialites like Mrs. T. Sufferin Taylor are successfully deployed to lure the media. In 1958, the first summer party is held with a committee of bold-faced names at the helm who are guaranteed to create the media buzz. which the party continues to generate to this day. When pediatrician Sherburne Brown arrives at the hospital in 1960, his impression is that some of its practices are still quite quaint, but he praises the competence of the medical staff. In just a few years, the increasing scope and complexity of its operations will bring the hospital well beyond quaint. In 1961, a major expansion of the building is announced with a $2 million funding goal. Emily Smith Warner, daughter of New York's former governor, Al Smith, and now chair of the hospital's governing board, is an unstoppable fundraiser, and in 1963, construction begins. 4 years later, the new wing is dedicated with great fanfare, a triumph, but even relentless fundraising cannot keep up with the expensive. The nursing school is looked upon as a drain on resources at a time of deficits, and in 1968, it is reluctantly closed. In the 1970s, Southampton Hospital's ophthalmology department gets nationwide recognition for groundbreaking work, led by the high-profile, highly respected R. Townley Payton. But like hospitals nationwide, it is getting squeezed by spiraling wages, a ceiling on charges, and inadequate payments from insurance companies. New ways to bring in money are needed. In response to the need to expand the fundraising base, benefit parties in Manhattan are added to the social calendar. Typical is the, quote, Come as a Blonde party hosted by media personality Maggie Newhouse, Mrs. Taylor, and Mrs. Montague Hackett Jr. The Southampton Hospital thrift shop opens and the Hampton Classic Horse Show becomes a benefit for the hospital. Another source of revenue, the Quarterbackers Club enlists local businesses as major contributors. In 1973, there's money to buy the Tower House on Herrick Road. In 1975, a new Northwest Wing opens. And in 1982, the Todd Nursing Home on Meeting House Lane is acquired. In 1984, having put a painful nurses' strike behind it, the hospital observes its 75th anniversary with multiple celebrations. It's now a 194-bed hospital with improved X-ray laboratory and emergency departments, which is not to say that fundraising demands can be eased. That task is in the good hands of Elaine Benson, a social navigator of immense skills who will spend 21 years as the hospital's director of community relations, making friends, bringing in money, and getting things done. With her on the job, the hospital will seldom be out of the media spotlight with its ever-expanding calendar of social events, often celebrity-studied, but also welcoming and expanding an increasingly democratized list of supporters. At this point, the hospital believes it is time to hire its first salaried president and chief executive officer. But in Dr. John Ferry, it picks the wrong man. For 4 years, Dr. Ferry indulges in a spending spree that puts the hospital in deep financial crisis. At first, his energetic promotion of satellite facilities is embraced, but as costs mount, and some of his ideas, new designer uniforms for his staff, seem frivolous. There is disenchantment, and then something close to financial panic. In August 1998, Dr. Ferry abruptly resigns, and the hospital begins a long, painful recovery. It's not always easy to win over donors who feel their money was squandered, but in time, confidence is restored. The hospital is about to open an emergency heart center and a dialysis center. It enters into an alliance with area hospitals, and in 2003 hosts the first decorator's show house to benefit the hospital. Then in 2008, Robert Challoner is hired as Chief Executive Officer and President and sets a steady course for the hospital. By 2009, the hospital's centennial, there is much to celebrate. In 2012, Southampton Hospital, affiliated with Stony Brook University Hospital and its School of Medicine to become Stony Brook Southampton Hospital, a 125-bed nonprofit medical facility that admits more than 6,000 patients annually, with about 25,000 visits to its state-of-the-art emergency department. Most recently, planning has begun for the construction of a new hospital on Stony Brook's Southampton campus. Now, however, all efforts are focused on fighting the COVID-19 pandemic. During this crisis, Southampton Hospital and its heroic staff are showing the same dedication they have always shown, fulfilling the mission set for the hospital by its founders more than a century ago, when they pledged to provide, quote, medical and surgical aid and nursing to sick or disabled persons of every creed, nationality, and color. And with that, I conclude my talk.
Well, since nobody can clap, I'll clap for you, Mary. That was very good. Everybody, I think, really would have enjoyed that.
Good.
To everybody watching right now, if anybody has any questions, please feel free to submit them. There is the Q&A button on the bottom of the Zoom toolbar. You can click that. It'll open up a new dialog box that we can use to answer these questions. And Mary, you can hit that stop sharing button at the top. That will close the lecture for everyone. Let's see, we have somebody submitted, not a question, but a comment saying, so interesting. Thank you, Penny. That was Penny from the Rogers Memorial Library, I believe. Here we go, first question. Hi, that was great. This is submitted by Nancy. I wondered what Southampton's history in midwifery was.
What is history in the which?
They're wondering what Southampton's history in midwifery was.
That's a very good question. I know one I can't answer, unfortunately, because I'm not sure when or if, but I think they have worked with midwives, but I don't know when that would have begun or how it has continued.
Yeah, I'm sure historically before the hospital and all that started, there was midwives in the village that assisted people and such. And now I'm sure there's still people who do that. But
right, I was thinking of the modern movement to increase the use of midwives.
Let's see.
But I know they went to, people were treated much more at home, even after there was a facility for treatment.
Nancy also just said she wondered if they lived in the house nearby. I guess wondering if the midwives lived nearby the hospital or something like that. But
right. She wondered if there was use of houses nearby.
I guess so. Nancy, if you would like to clarify slightly.
I know that when it was still in the Goodale boarding house, they did rent rooms in the neighborhood because they needed more space.
Yeah. It was probably really helpful when they had the nurses station at the hospital where they could actually live in the housing.
Right. The tower house also was meant for housing nurses and staff, and uh, they got that much later.
I also really think it's interesting how that hospital has a long history of teaching, where um, it had the nursing school that was started almost immediately as the hospital began, and even now they often have resident doctors that are always there every year. That they even come by the museum where we give them lectures and introduce them to the history of the town
Uh-huh.
when they all first moved here. So it's interesting how it's has a very large history of education there. See, oh, Nancy submitted. Yes, I heard that boarding houses um, and wondered like they did in London after World War II, where they lived at a covenant and were sent out, but were connected to the hospital. Okay, so like if there was a house where nurses or midwives or something like that were living in like a boarding house and were sent out to assist people when necessary. Um,
Uh, After the residence closed, you mean, or before?
so I'm guessing,
Before there was a residence.
yeah, I'm guessing
Yeah,
before.
yeah, there was a tradition right from Charlotte Lillywhite that the nurses would, you know, were expected to make house calls for emergencies.
Yeah. So before the hospital really was up and functioning and they had a full building and when it was just that dispensary.
Yeah,
They only, in your book, I believe it talks about a little bit more in detail where they only had what, 2 rooms, I believe, upstairs and
they
they
had 2 rooms at first, then they added
hallway.
3 more, and then they spread out in the neighborhood.
Yeah. I think
Yeah,
I remember one line in the book says that there was like gurneys in the hallways and stuff like that.
yes, yeah. It got overcrowded very quickly.
As you can imagine.
Yeah.
So yeah, they would definitely very often make house calls or things like that. Or before the hospital was going, if there was doctors nearby, I'm sure a local doctor would easily go by people's homes or have them over their home to do any sort of work.
Considering they had nothing until 1909, they were all used to having people, doctors and or whatever, come to their houses.
Yeah,
So it took a while for them to transition to think that this dispensary wasn't just for poor people.
yeah. Um, Nancy also said thanks. And was it David Halleck who owned the Halleck House on South Main? When did it switch from having babies at home to having babies in the hospital? 2 questions there.
Uh, yeah, there's a well, there was a whole tradition of doctors in the Halleck family, and that house on South Main Street was a predecessor of this Dr. Halleck, but that's the Halleck house, definitely.
But
And there's a sign. There's a sign out in front.
we're not sure if the Dr. Halleck lived there, right?
Uh, if he lived there, no, he probably did. I don't know. Later on, he lived on North Main Street
Gotcha.
when he was a doctor here.
And she was also asking, when did it switch from having babies at home to having babies at the hospital?
Well, it was a gradual transition.
I would imagine probably as soon as the hospital became a function or an idea, something that was possible,
Yeah,
people probably very quickly decided to do that as long as they were able to.
yeah, yeah. I'm not sure about before 1913 when they had a functioning modern hospital, but probably I don't know that they would have left home. They would have called the midwife or the nurse or whatever.
Especially given if it wasn't terribly expensive in the beginning times for people to
Yeah.
be able to do so. And I believe Nancy said I live here now. Oh, I believe she means at the Halleck House. Um, so interesting. Let's see. Oh, we have another question. Oh, from Penelope. Mary, she wants to know, were you a candy striper?
No, I wasn't. Uh,
She
Was
said,
she?
she asks, can you talk a bit about that, meaning the candy stripers, and that my sister Elizabeth, who is listening, and I were, and so were many others, all seem to love it. P.S. I think we grew up in a house on South Main that Dr. Thomas built for his son.
Yeah.
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 So,
Yeah, it was 100 years, and I couldn't put everything in. I was sorry to leave out the candy stripers.
yeah. Let's see. All right. Well, if does anybody else have any other questions or comments that would like to submit for the time being? Otherwise, what I would like to do now is I will share my screen quickly, and I will ask everybody if you have the ability to head on over to our website whenever you are able to, on our blog page. So if you go to our website and you go to the top where it says blog, you'll be able to scroll down the page and find a lot of the work we've been doing recently, putting out a lot of great information from our archives. And one in particular was Mary's article she wrote about the 1918 influenza. It goes a little bit more in depth here about everything that went on, particularly with that, talking about C. Elmer Smith and things like that. Many of you maybe have already read through this, but it's a really great, interesting read. And also, same on our website, if you are on the top and you go to the shop page, there's Mary's book, as I mentioned before. It's right here. We have, I believe, a whole box of them in our inventory, so very easy. We have plenty of copies if anybody's interested. You can go right on here and order yourself one, and we'll have them shipped out to you within the week. And if anyone else is interested in any of our other talks, again, on our website, you click on the calendar page, and everything is listed right here that you can RSVP for. And I will be updating this actually later today with some more programs going forward. And let's see. Oh, somebody, I was going to check if anyone else had any other questions. They're asking where to buy the book. I'm glad I scrolled down and I mentioned all that. So, again, thank you, Mary, for doing this talk. And thank you, everybody, for joining us. And we'll be signing off. Have a good day, everyone.